Welcome to the Wiggin Sessions. I'm your host, Addison Wiggin. I have with me someone who has become a good friend in the last couple of months as we've been talking about his work on YouTube, helping people understand the Great Reset, what's happening in the global economy. Mark, you've been setting YouTube on fire. And part of what you've been doing is using the whiteboard that's behind you to make a lot of the big macro trends and ideas and economic influences, and also the people who are involved in pushing these things simple. Sometimes when we talk about macro ideas and trends, and when we talk about the economy and the Fed and money and crypto and all those kinds of things, it gets a little bit overwhelming. But you've been doing a great job of breaking it down into its component parts and making it easy. And then you're using a little bit of technology there to help people understand what your ideas are and how you think about things. And I think it's my Swiss clock. You've been doing a great job of breaking things down into their component parts and making it easy for people to understand what's happening in the broader economy, not just in the US, but globally, because everything's interconnected now. So first of all, Mark, I want to welcome you to the Wiggin Sessions, and I really appreciate you coming on and helping us out here.
Well, welcome me back. I'm back for another time.
Yeah, that's right.
I appreciate you having me back. As I told you last time, I've been a big fan of yours over the last dozen years, and so to be here sharing information with you back and forth is pretty amazing. And so thanks for having me back.
To get started, you told me an interesting story, both in the last session, and also in conversations that we've had, in the months ensuing. You have the advice that you're giving and the perspective that you have on the markets and the economy comes from experience. You sort of had, you've been through the ringer a little bit, and now you're trying to help people understand what you went through. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your background, and then also what the experience was through the financial crisis in 2008?
Yeah, sure. So, first thing, we're talking about kind of making things easy to understand, and kind of this macro framework. My macro framework is like really macro. And I believe that we have to zoom out to get more perspective on things. I have kids. And so a lot of times I'll say to my kid, like, hey, you can't do this thing. And because they're only looking at this micro level, they don't understand why. But if you have the perspective I do, it makes it clear. And so I think that's one framework that we'll go through today. I just want to say that. As far as kind of my story, I think it might have been Porter Stansberry that would say some lessons in life can't be taught, they can only be learned. And so that kind of tells you a little bit of my story. The famous one of Mike Tyson's, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face kind of a thing. And so, I've been punched in the face. And it's really why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? I don't want people to get the punch in the face like I did. And so the short version is that right out of high school, I started buying and selling real estate, distressed real estate, buying bank repos. I just jumped right into the investor game. I guess the lens between investor and business owner are very blurred. I fixed and flipped almost 150 homes. I don't know if I was an investor or a business owner or whatever. I started developing real estate, but at the same time, I also was doing multiple businesses. I started an e-commerce business in 2001 at the bottom of the dot-com crash, which was the worst time to start something. And as I started this business, and I went to these brands and I said, hey, I want to sell your products on my website. And they laughed at me. And they told me, no one would ever buy anything online. That's ridiculous. And I'm like, well, I think they will.
And yet here we are.
To build this website. And so I managed to build this e-commerce website into one of the biggest in its niche, and had a Fortune 500 exit there. I had a medical equipment business. And so I had businesses in multiple areas. I was an investor. I was developing real estate. But what happened is that I found out I was very good at making money, but I didn't understand all the rules of investing. And so what happened is I sold my medical business and I sold my e-commerce business, and I sold all my rental units, and I was developing some really big multifamily and commercial properties. I was pretty much retired. I had just got married, just had a kid, built a custom home, 6-car garage, elevator, and ocean whitewater views in Southern California. I mean, I was done. I got the sports car in the garage, like tapped out. And then Mike Tyson came and punched me in the face. And what happened is obviously the 2008 financial crash came, and I'm not alone. Millions of people got wiped out in that. And I had thought I had done things right. And so what do I mean by that? I'm a student of history, as we'll dig into later today. And so I had looked at history and seen that in California, real estate had only dropped really one time from 89 to 92. And it was about a 30% drop over that 4-year period. The worst 12-month drop was about 6%. So I was like, well, if it dropped 6%, I'm okay. If it doubled that, if it was double the worst ever, 12%, I'm okay. If it tripled that, if it was triple the worst ever in history, 18% a year, I'm okay. But Southern California dropped 60% in 1 year. And I thought I had a great portfolio that wasn't levered up, and I thought I was good, but I wasn't. And I got wiped out. I went from having it all, thought I was retired, thought I had figured it out, to owing millions of dollars and not having any income and having a family to take care of. So it really made me kind of think, dang, I gotta figure this out. And that's the point where I said, I'm good at making money, but I don't understand what's going on in this financial casino, in this financial world. I don't understand some of the key pieces of investing. And that's the holes in my education that I got to figure out. And so I did. So I dug deep, I figured out, I dug deep into my own education. It was a concept that I learned that really changed everything for me. And it was that money is like energy. It doesn't disappear, it transfers. And so then the thought was, well, shoot, when I lost all my wealth in 2008, someone else got it. And I'm not the most competitive person, but that didn't sit well with me. I didn't like that someone else had taken all my money. And so I kind of became obsessed with this concept of wealth transfers. And it's something I've been studying and talking about for a dozen years now. And I vowed to myself and my family that I would make sure I was on the receiving end of wealth transfers moving forward, and not on the giving end. And so that's something I've just been studying for a dozen years, digging deep into my own education, my own research, working with some of the best and brightest people in the world for the last 12 years, and teaching it and trying to make these complex subjects easy to understand to prevent other people from going down the same trap that I fell into.
Well, let's talk about a few of those things. A lot of I'm going to read a list because there's a lot of them, okay. But most of the topics that I'm about to read off, we've covered in the Wiggin Sessions, and you've helped us in the past. We've written about some of your work, but it goes in what we're going to do today. It goes into much more in depth on pretty much every one of the concepts I'm about to present.
Yeah.
And then also, I do want to mention that for people that are paying attention, we have a special offer at the end of this presentation. So pay attention now, just listen. And then if you're interested in digging deeper, there's a package available at a discount price, right, Mark? We talked about that.
Yeah. And really, I just want to give people the framework that I put together that helped me see this more clearly, helped me navigate this, and end up way better off than I ever was in 2008, both financially and from an education standpoint. And so I want to kind of share some of that with your audience.
Yeah. So let me get to this list. We're talking about the Great Reset.
Yep.
And the framework that you're going to put it in is peak centralization. That's the beginning. There are 3 converging cycles in history. Right. And it'll be important to kind of dig into what those cycles are, because it'll be an introduction to the idea of market cycles to many people who are paying attention right now. And then we'll dig into how people can act on what they learned today.
Yep.
So let me get to this list, because this is where I geek out and go, this is what it's all about. We're watching crumbling institutions in the US, politics, academic institutions, the commercial enterprise. We even have supply chain issues. Who would ever thought that would happen?
Yeah.
We have massive political divisions. I don't need to go into that. Everyone knows that's going on. We have never-ending protests. We just had a big one in Washington yesterday. Government response to the pandemic, that has been an ongoing and vastly boring discussion, but it's changing the way we interact with one another. And this whole Zoom thing happened during the pandemic, and I've been living out of my basement for the last 6 months. And then one thing that we always get our hands on is just the immense amount of money printing, not just in the US, but globally. Central banks are trying to print fiat money to get us out of an endless crisis. And as soon as one crisis is over, another one starts. We've got pandemic, we've got climate change. And then also there's a sort of a social battle going on between collectivism and the individual.
Yep.
You and I are individuals. We believe in the power of individuals to act in independence and take care of their families. You've already mentioned that. But collectivism has reared its ugly head once again, seems to never go away. And then we just have the pressure against being able to express your own opinion. Like where did that go? And I think that's probably part of the collectivism and individual expression problem that we're facing as well. So your presentation today, which I think is awesome, by the way, you look at 3 different converging cycles that are kind of all happening at once, and we'll talk about it as you go through it. But you've got a nifty piece of technology behind you there, and you can get started. Give us a little introduction.
Yeah, I would just say, just for everyone listening, I think the reason why this is super important is that you need perspective and clarity, kind of like I talked about with my kids. You need that perspective and clarity to kind of understand where we're going. And the world we're going into, as you've kind of already laid out, is definitely not the world that we've left behind. And while all of this seems very random, like this is a black swan event, it's not. This is actually very predictable. We could tell from history that we knew we would end up here. And when you understand that, then it makes it clear of where we're going. And when you understand those 2 things, then you understand how to navigate that with your money. You'll understand where the areas are going to be that you'll want to be invested in, not be invested in, and things like that. So that's kind of what we'll go through. So we'll kind of break it down. I do have this nifty board back here as well. As you said, I try to bring some visuals. So there's 3 revolutionary cycles that are about to converge, or they're actually converging right now. And unfortunately, slaughter the underprepared. And so, I like to say that the ostrich could choose to bury its head in the sand, but it won't keep it from getting eaten. Ayn Rand said that you can choose to ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of that. And so you can choose not to pay attention, but it's not going to work out well for you. The other thing that I'd say about this real quick before we just dive in, one more thing, we'll get going, is that we're going to look at 3 different cycles that are all converging right now. And so one is I call PSC, which is political, social, and just cultural. This is like political cycles, human nature. Then we have technological cycles and revolutions, and then we have financial cycles and revolutions. And the reason why it's important to look at all 3 of those is because, like any financial indicator, one is not conclusive, right? You're looking for multiple indicators that are all kind of showing the same thing. And so what we're doing is most people are just looking at financial cycles, and they're going, well, we're at the end of a long-term credit cycle, interest rates are at 0. What's going to happen next? Is the dollar going to remain the reserve currency or whatever? But they're only looking at this one piece right here. And I think you need to understand the other 2 pieces to really understand, like I said, how we got here, what the heck is going on, and most importantly, where we go from here. And so I don't need to spend a lot of time here because you already did. Obviously, anybody that's halfway paying attention understands that tensions are high across the world. Talks in the United States about another civil war or a national divorce. We have protests happening in every country of the world. And it's not because of the pandemic. This is a key piece. Most people think that around the world, they're pushing back on mandates and things like that. And they are. That's what's happening now. But before the pandemic happened, there was 10 countries with over 1 million people each in the streets protesting before the pandemic. So it was already happening, and now they're still in the streets protesting, just on a different subject. But the key piece is that the entire world is pushing back, and we're going to dig more into that in a minute. And like I said, it's not just a black swan event. They were already doing this before the pandemic. Now, 10 countries with 1 million people each, there was a lot more countries with smaller numbers. And then we have this great reset narrative. Some people think it's a conspiracy. It doesn't mean what it says. Well, Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, wrote a book, and the title of the book is COVID-19, The Great Reset. And so in that book, he outlines all of this stuff. And so I say that I take them at their word. And so I listen to them. Of course, they've ran these types of ads on Twitter. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Today, they're trying to walk that back. And the media is like, oh, they didn't really say that. Well, they did. I have the screenshot of it. And so they did say that by 2030, you'll own nothing and be happy. That's their plan for you. And as a matter of fact, they have a plan for every area of your life. As a matter of fact, they want to micromanage your entire life, from your business to the environment to how you work, what your economy looks like. This section is the fourth industrial revolution, which is pretty interesting. If I told you what their plans are for this, you would think I'm crazy and you'd want to lock me up. And again, I would just say, read their books and they'll tell you what they want. And they even want to tell you what to eat. As a matter of fact, they're already starting their marketing and they're saying, like, good grub, why we might be eating insects soon. I ain't going to eat the bugs. I'm going to keep eating steak. I'm not going to follow their plan. And while that sounds crazy, how do they plan to get us there by 2030? And that's the key piece that we want to kind of follow along, because that's
2030 is not that far away.
Nine years from now, you know. And what I'm going to show you is what I'm going to show you is that all this change is going to happen in this decade, and it's not far off. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at one by one. So right now we're just going to look at this kind of political, social, cultural revolution cycle, which is kind of the really big key piece that unlocks everything. And so if we just dig into that real quick, we can see that the first thing is that people think that progress is like linear, like step by step, we're making these improvements. Really, it's not like linear. It's really like exponential, like this. But even though progress is exponential like this, what we have is that we have like cycles that keep repeating within that progress. All right. So that's the key piece. So even though things are changing, they're actually staying the same. What do they say? Nothing changes but the names and the faces. So it keeps changing, but it's the same. The other thing that we have to understand is that there's stages to the way these cycles work. And they go between, it's like a pendulum that swings back and forth. We have optimism and pessimism, and things kind of go back and forth. And then we have these 4 seasons, just like we do in the real world, where we have summer, spring, winter, fall. And each one leads to the next. So without a spring, and we need the plant of the spring to have the fall harvest, each one kind of leads to the same. And the other thing is that cycles have time periods. And this is pretty interesting, because if you're into like any of these people listening are into like technical analysis, into like trading, things like that, you understand everything's mathematical. So you have like Fibonacci retracement lines. And so everything is mathematical, which is weird. And so we have these cycles, and they kind of start in like these 28-year cycles. 3 times 28 equals an 84-year cycle. 3 times 84 equals a 250-year cycle. So it's 3s. So just like you would see in technical analysis, triple bottoms, things like that. And the reason why these are key dates is I'm going to show you in a minute. We're going to hone in on this 84-year cycle, which so you can kind of see where we're at, as well as this 250-year cycle, which is where we're at as well. But in this 250-year time frame, we can see that really this book, General Sir John Glove, he wrote a book called The Fate of Empires. And no empire has really lasted more than 250 years. No democracy has really lasted more than 250 years. So there's something about this key date, which I'm going to show you in a second. And so let's just start at this 84-year cycle. Now, a lot of you might have heard of things like the fourth turning. So the fourth turning talks about an 80-year cycle. There's another one like the pendulum talks about an 80-year cycle. We'll talk about those in a minute. But on these 84-year cycles, I like to call them like a regime change. a regime change or a populist uprising cycle. So about every 84 years. Now, I say about because just like the seasons on the calendar, it has an exact date of when spring, comes, but it doesn't mean the weather changes exactly, right? So it's plus or minus. And so we say about 84 years. It could be 74, it could be 90, but about every 84 years. So 84 years ago from today, we had regime change. So we had the end of World War II. That was Hitler, that was Mussolini, that was in the United States. FDR's New Deal kind of took America from kind of a capitalist to like a socialist type country. 84 years before that was Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, which led to the European Spring, or the Springtime of the Peoples, which was the largest revolution in European history. So every 84 years, we're seeing this population, or populist uprising, which of course we're seeing today. As I said, all these people in the streets out there protesting today against mandates, but they were there before the pandemic. And it really started, we could see some of these things back with like Brexit. So Brexit was trying to move away from the EU, right? Their populist uprising. I think Trump being elected in the United States was a big sign of that as well, rejecting the establishment, right? Having this populist uprising. BLM and Antifa, throughout the last year, rioting throughout the United States is a big sign of those things happening. And so about every 84 years, this happens. And that's kind of where we're at. But like I said, every 3 times 84 equals 252. But before we go into that, I want to jump into this. It's called generational theory. And a lot of people have probably seen this before. This is kind of out of this Fourth Turning book. And the generational theory basically says that all cycles are reactionary and one leads to the next. And so it's an 80-year cycle broken down by 4 20-year turnings. And you've probably heard this, right? Hard times create strong men. And then strong men create good times. And then good times create weak men. And then weak men create hard times. So let me just put this into practical understanding. Let's take a look 80 years ago, end of World War II. Germany went through a massive hyperinflation, the worst that, it's the textbook example that we look at today. And coming out of World War II, the country was completely crushed. They had, no economy. And the Germans literally had to kind of rebuild the country by their bare hands. So they were in severe hard times 80 years ago. And those severe hard times created amazingly strong people of Germany. Well, those strong men created really good times in Germany, and Germany became the economic powerhouse of Europe, right? It's been the engine that's been driving the European economy. But those strong men created good times, and then those good times have created weak men. So then Germany had abundance, and they thought everything was good, and they created weak men that started making bad policies. For example, let's turn all our nuclear energy off, and let's just go to energy that doesn't work. Some people call them renewables. I like to call them unreliables. It doesn't blow wind all the time. It's not sunny all the time. They increase the taxes super high. They reduce the work hours in the week, right? So now they don't want to work as much as they used to. Now, I think 28 hours a week. The taxes are sky high. The energy is the highest in the EU, 10 times higher now. And so they started making weak men. And then those weak men have created these hard times that's where they're in right now. Germany has massive energy crisis going on. They're begging Russia, Putin, to send them energy down the pipeline. And so they have this. And part of the reason why is these people here, the weak men creating hard times, are violating the natural laws of the universe. The natural laws of the universe is like gravity. If I drop this pen, it's going to fall. Now, with enough money and technology, I could temporarily suspend or bend the laws of gravity, but it's always there. And this is violating the natural law of sowing and reaping. You must produce before you consume. But here we have people that have lived 2 generations now, are consuming, but they've never produced. These people, the politicians, the leaders, they're making decisions with no real world understanding of how things work because they've never produced. And so it's causing this to happen. And that's kind of where we're at. All right, now 3 times 84 equals 252. So we have this 250-year cycles. Now, every 250 years, we have a revolution. And this is where we're at today. So 250 years before was the American and the French Revolution. 250 years before that was the Protestant Reformation. We can keep going, but the big piece to understand here is that what those represent is they're pushing back on globalism or centralization, and they're moving to decentralization. And this is a very key piece. So in the American Revolution, they rejected the centralization of the monarchy, and they set up a decentralized government. They set up a republic. In the Protestant Reformation, at the time, the church had amassed all the power. They had the Bible. That was the only way, that was the only way to get to God. But once the printing press, 70 years before that, had decentralized all the information, the people said, wait a minute, this is not what you've been telling us. We don't need you anymore. And the church lost its power. They tried, and this is a key piece, they tried to hang on to power. And anyone who would talk about the Bible or outside of what the church said was called a heretic, and they were put to death. And millions of people were killed. And the church tried to maintain its grip. Didn't matter. They couldn't stop it. The information was out. Sort of like today, where the government in peak centralization is trying to maintain its grasp. But just like the printing press before had decentralized information, the internet has also done the same thing. And today, just like the heretics of the past, the government will kill you online. They'll eliminate your presence online if you speak out, if you're a heretic based off of what their religion or their doctrine says. Very similar. But just like we saw in the Protestant Reformation, it doesn't matter. There's nothing they can do to stop it. It's too late. The technology changes. And one of the key pieces,
Mark, can you put that in context of the Great Reset? Because in Klaus Schwab's point of view, it's a global centralization. And Mark Carney would fit into that role too. Like there are major global actors who want to pull things on a global level. So what you were describing is more like on a national level, which I think is accurate. But there's going to be a stronger force opposing decentralization that they're just getting started. And maybe that's the impetus for revolution itself.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I think to your point, it is a global thing. So it is not just about one country. This is a global thing going on. And so what we've seen is that the pendulum swings from centralization to decentralization. So right now we're maxing out on centralization. And of course, we can see that throughout the world. You made a perfect point. The World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, the World Meteorological Association. We have the IMF, the UN, et cetera. And so everything in the world we're at peak globalization, peak centralization. And I mentioned, if people speak out, their character gets assassinated online, meaning they're, deplatformed. But that's not just happening in the United States. That's happening all over the world. Look at Julian Assange. I mean, he decentralized information, and he's been locked up for a decade or more. And so it's happening all over the world. And we see Klaus Schwab, to your point, he's online talking about how the internet has a virus. He said, that's his words. The internet has a virus, and we need to work collectively to take care of that virus. So what they're talking about is we need to have a global digital ID. And if we can get everyone to use this global digital ID, and then they can't use the internet anonymously anymore, then everyone is protected. But what that also means is they have a single switch they can turn you on and off with. And so to your point, I would agree. Yes, this is a global thing, not just a national thing. But
I think there's fear too. There's fear too that they a lot of the people that are involved in the discussion, Bill Gates being one of them, have developed a lot of the technology, or at least funded a lot of the development of the technology that we're currently using. And that gives them the switch. So if they have if they're on a mission, if they have the vision of creating a new technological utopia where everyone agrees with each other, those of us who use the technology, we're talking on Zoom right now, like what is the recourse to that?
Well, we're going to move into technological revolutions next, which will start putting a lot of these questions into context. So let's jump into the next section, and we'll take a look at that, because the technological piece is a great question. It is the big piece that changes everything. Just like the printing press was the technological piece that changed the way the church had the monopoly over people, or the power of the people. We're witnessing another technology that's also changing things as well. And just like the church, no matter how many people they killed, no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't keep the change from happening. I believe we're in a situation today where no matter how hard they try and how much they squeeze or how many people they deplatform, they can't stop this from happening either. So let's jump into that and take a look at that. So it's a perfect segue. You're following along. So we went over the political revolutions, and now we'll talk about the technological cycles. And this is a really key piece. So if you look back throughout history, what really changes history is what I call mega political factors, mega political, and the technology plays into that, as I was just kind of alluding to. And so a couple of characteristics about a technological revolution is it's not a new technology. I'm not talking about the iPhone. I'm not talking about Uber. It has to be disruptive, not just incremental. So the iPhone was like, cool, I had a phone, now my phone does more things. I have the internet, now I can have it in my hand. That's incremental. But I'm talking about something that's disruptive. And then also technological revolutions, they build entire new economies. And basically a technological revolution changes the way humanity works, changes the entire course of humanity. These are really big, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean here. And so we've had 5, and each one of these has changed the course of humanity. These are massive wealth transfer opportunities for people if you know how to play these right. So in this book right here, Technological Revolutions and Financial Capital, they really break this down. But if I talk about them, 1771 was the Industrial Revolution. It changed the way the world worked. Up until that point, all of humanity, people just worked on the farms. And now we had machines that could do work, and people started centralizing and moving into the cities. It's a key piece I'm going to come back to. About 50 years later, 1829 was the age of steam and railways. So for all of humanity, we had horsepower and manpower. Now we had steam engines and rails. We could move stuff across continents. We could never do that before. 1875, the age of steel and electricity. So that changed humanity. Before electricity, we had candles. Candles were light for 5,000 years. And then we had electricity. Well, what's electricity? Oh, it's like this digital candle. Well, what do we need a digital candle for? Candles have been light for 5,000 years. And look, it's even portable. I don't even need all these wires. It's way better. Well, electricity was a digital candle, but it became so much more. It changed humanity. And of course, the age of steel, we could only build 2 or 3 stories with bricks. Now we could build skyscrapers. We could build bridges, right? Things like that. Changed humanity. 1908, about 50 years later, the age of oil and automobiles. All of humanity, people walked and rode horses. Now we have cars. It's a pretty big deal. Obviously, more than just cars, transportation allows us to move food, produce, medicine, things like that. 1971, if you're following along, about 50 years, 1971 was the age of information and telecommunications. So it was the invention of the microprocessor, which allowed us to have computers, mobile phones, internet, telecommunications, et cetera. Changed the way we work. To your point, we're doing Zoom right now, changed humanity. And if you're doing the math, about 50 years later, it puts us right here today, 2021, and we're witnessing decentralization, a technology that's bringing something that will change the way the world works. And that technology is a technology that does decentralization. And I'm going to break that down.
How much do you think the pandemic has ushered in a lot of the discussions we've had, you and I have had, but also other people that I've talked to on these Wiggin Sessions have said something that is equal to all of these trends were in place and the pandemic just happened to kick it into gear. I mean, that's what Klaus Schwab is saying about centralizing the world, but it's also, it has awakened people to the fact that they can communicate with one another without necessarily, caving into a centralized organization.
Well, like I said before we started, I think a lot of these things look random and like a black swan event, or like you said, they started because of the pandemic. But as I was kind of making the case, no, most of this started before the pandemic. And if you look back through history, every 84 years, we have a revolution or a populist uprising. Every 250 years, we have a revolution. We are at that 250-year time frame. So while this goes, well, shoot, people are just mad because there's mandates and they're pushing back. No. we're in the cycle where the pendulum is pushing back on centralization. Everyone can see that we're at peak centralization and we're pushing back. And so I don't believe any of this is random. We knew that there was going to be, we've seen that centralization was increasing. History tells us that we would peak and will eventually swing back. I think the pandemic did kind of kick it into overdrive, sure. But I was using Zoom before the pandemic came along. It's been around. But the pandemic definitely accelerated it. But it's also part of, in the fourth turning, you have these 4 20-year cycles. The last one is where all the change happens. And this is a key piece I didn't hit on. Vladimir Lenin, who's not my favorite person, but he had a good quote. And he said that sometimes there's decades where nothing seems to happen. And then there's days where decades seem to happen. And that's where we're at right now. This next 10 years or 9 years that we have, or 8 years that we have left, we're going to see all of this change happen in these 8 years. That's where these decades are going to seem to happen. And so I believe that this rise to decentralization with Zoom, to your point, is just natural. It's part of the natural order. And yes, the pandemic did seem to kind of escalate that. All right. Now, when we want to look at the way this works, and this is one of the reasons why, so through political cycles, we can see that on that fourth turning, that fourth 20-year cycle is where all the change happens. But from a technological standpoint, we can also see it. Remember, we're looking for multiple converging indicators or cycles. And so when you're looking at new technologies, we can use something called the diffusion of innovation. And most people have probably seen this upside down bell curve, right? Or this bell curve, not upside down. And basically, this measures the way that a new technology moves through adoption. So we can look at telephones or color TVs or washing machines or internet or whatever you want. And you can see this is how it works. And so it starts out having like the innovators. So these are the guys that invented it, obviously. That's about 2.5% of the population. Then you have the early adopters. The early adopters are the ones that kind of see it, like they see the vision. They're the visionaries. They jump in. That gets you to about 15%. Then you have the early majority, gets you to about 35%, and then late majority and laggers. And so this, all innovation, all new technologies kind of follow this. And if we look at it, one thing that we would use to measure this is something called an S-curve. If you're looking at technology, you can use S-curve. You can even look at it to see how fast a virus might move through a population as well. But in this instance, we're going to look at an S-curve in regards to this technology. And the way an S-curve works is that a time it takes for a new technology to go from 0 to 10% adoption is the same amount of time it should take to go from 10 to 90% adoption. And so I guess the technology that we're talking about decentralizing the world is Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. So now we're decentralizing the world. And what's interesting is at a time when the entire world is at peak centralization and is ready to move towards decentralization, we have a technology that gives us exactly what we need, which is decentralization. And so if we're looking at Bitcoin to kind of measure this, we can see that Bitcoin reached a 10% adoption within 2 years by about 2019. So using S-curve measurements, we can see that we should be at about 90% adoption by 2029, which is, again, by the end of the decade. Now, new technologies typically have much faster adoption because they build on top of the technologies before it. So, for example, the internet was adopted way faster than the telephone because it used the telephone lines in order to have adoption.
So are you using Bitcoin as a proxy for all blockchain?
Yeah,
because it seems like the underlying innovation is blockchain, and that's gonna revolutionize all of industry, and it has been.
Right. So everything is becoming decentralized. And so that's the key piece here. This is the big theme, right? And so as the world has been centralizing, now the world is going to start moving towards decentralization, and the technology, to your point, Bitcoin as a proxy, the technology is giving us exactly what we need, which is decentralization. Another key piece that we can talk about real quick is that also, I mentioned these mega politics, these mega political things. And so what happens is if you look at the way that we went from the feudal society was decentralized. Everyone just was on farms. And then the church kind of centralized that power. When the church got broke, and then we went, that was like in 1500, and then people could talk freely, share information. We had an explosion of development. We went into the Renaissance age. And what happened is through the Renaissance age, we started having science and technology, which then led to the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, about 250 years later, brought us technology that started to centralize us again. And now everybody moved to the cities, moved from the farms, moved into the cities. We built giant factories. We built giant cities. And if you wanted to make money, you had to be in the United States. And not just in the United States, you had to be in a city. And a city was where the jobs were. And what happens is, because of that centralizing nature, it made it very easy for the governments to squeeze everybody. The return on violence was very high. Meaning, just like a mob boss, if you were in New York City, I'd say like, hey, your bakery needs to pay me for protection. And what are you going to do? Like, you're there in my neighborhood. And the nation could do the same thing. And like, hey, what are you going to do? Move your factory, pay me my taxes, et cetera. And so this centralizing allowed the nation states to grow really big and allowed them, because the return on violence was very low. But now, just like in the Protestant Reformation, we have a new technology that's decentralizing. And so to your point with the pandemic, it was already starting to happen. Big companies are now a bunch of little companies. I have about 15 people that work for me. Everyone's decentralized all around the world. And we have all these little tiny companies now instead of these giant, big mega companies. And these little tiny companies are all decentralized, and they're all over the world. Today, you can, and this is, and what we've seen through the pandemic is, to your point, it escalated it. People found out they could work from home. And so now people are moving to Wyoming and Idaho and Montana. They could never live there before because they couldn't work before. And not just that, they can move to Mexico or Costa Rica and they can go work from there. And what's happening is, as people start decentralizing out, the government starts losing its ability to squeeze people. The return on violence is too low for them. But even though they don't have my factory, I'm physically not in their territory. My company is too small. They still have control over the money. They still have control over the money, but that's where it's all changing, right? So now we have Bitcoin, we have cryptocurrencies that are breaking that grip. And so no matter how much they want to try to maintain that power, like the church did in 1500, the mega politics have shifted. The world is going from a period of centralization, and now the world is decentralizing.
Yeah, what do you make of so Bitcoin as a proxy again it represents the ability of the individuals to use money that's not controlled by the government. What do you think is going to happen when, like, the Fed has been talking about putting out a digital coin and making people use a digital dollar? There's going to be a conflict between a centralized digital currency and the decentralized ones.
So I think that the central bank digital currency will be actually a gateway, a Trojan horse, if you will, that will actually bring more people into cryptocurrency than away from it. And the reason why is because in the innovators' diffusion of innovation, typically you have what's called the chasm. And that's where technology has to appeal to a wider audience to really get that mainstream adoption. And so there's a lot of people who still think cryptocurrencies are stupid, they're dumb, they don't work, I can't have something digital, it's too difficult, I don't understand it, or fill in the blank. But what would happen is when the Fed says, hey, you want your $1,400 in STIMI, download this app and we're going to give you money. Well, everyone's going to do it. I would do it. Give me $1,400, sure. And so then I'm going to download the app. I'll have my CBDC in there, and then people will start spending it. And then they're going to go, wait a minute, this is no different than Venmo or PayPal. This is easy. Oh, and I guess I can deal with digital money, and this works. And then they're going to go, well, why is it that my central bank digital currency continues to buy less goods and services and Bitcoin continues to go up in purchasing power? Well, maybe I should just use Bitcoin. And it will be a very easy transition to, I think, onboard billions of people.
Yeah, I can envision a period of time that there will be, like in the 1830s through 50s, there was what were called the wildcat bankers.
Yeah, free banking.
Where people were printing their own money, and then it was good in a certain area. And it seems like even in the early days of cryptocurrency, like, you could spend this money in advertising. They were advertising cryptos, for example.
Yeah.
I can envision a period of time of competing cryptos after the digital dollar comes out.
Yep.
But what comes behind that is usually a wave of regulation. Yeah, that's what happened. They shut down all the wildcat banks right before the Civil War, and they issued the greenbacks so they could fund the war.
Yep. And then Lincoln died. Yeah, that's another story. But I think to your point, you're right. But what I'm trying to say is that history tells us something else is happening. Because the technology is shifting and the mega politics are shifting, just like when the church couldn't control the people anymore because the printing press had decentralized the information. No matter how many people they killed, they couldn't stop it. No amount of regulation would matter. And and then through the centralization, it allowed the nation states to grow really big because they have this extreme high return on violence. But now that everything is decentralized and the information is out there, Joe Rogan's getting more views than CNN, for example. They can't stop the information. People are now moving all over the world. They can't stop the people. They can't control the companies. The last piece is the money, but they're losing it. And no matter, and so what we can glean from this is that they are going to continue to squeeze even harder. So it's my vision that over this probably climaxes in about 3 or 4 more years. They're going to continue to squeeze harder and harder. And so Newton's law of physics says that for every action, there's an equal opposite. So the more they squeeze, the more people push back. The more people push back, the more they squeeze, the more they squeeze, the more people push back. And so they're going to try, to your point, Addison, they're going to try more regulations and they're going to try more squeezing. But just like the Protestant Reformation, it just won't matter.
So what does that mean for the dollar as the reserve currency of the world?
Well, that's a great question. And I'm glad that you asked that, which takes us right into the third section, which is, so we've talked about the political, kind of social, cultural. We talked about the technological, and now we can talk about what happens to the financial system or the financial cycle that's converging right now. And so the question that you ask, what happens to the dollar, is a question I hear all the time. Will the dollar remain the reserve currency of the world? Will there be a new one? Will it be the Chinese yuan? Will we have a CBDC? Will it be an SDR? Or maybe Jim Rickards will be right and we'll go back to a gold standard. Which will it be? And I think I have the answer. And so we can also see that just like with these cycles, with the technological cycle, 250 years, revolutions, technological, 50 years. And then we have financial, we have about an 80-year cycle, this long-term debt cycle. And basically, Ray Dalio kind of breaks it down where we kind of have hard money. So that's gold. Eventually, the gold goes in the banks. They give us paper money, which is layer 2. We can do that much faster. Eventually, people start to think that the paper money is real. And so then the government can increase the debt. They print more paper claims than there are gold. Then you have a debt crisis. So we had several debt crises. 1933, they seized the gold. 1944, they reset the system. 1971, they severed the gold ties. We go on to fiat money and they print too much. And so they print too much of it. And then finally, we have to go to a new monetary system, which we did 80 years ago. The entire world went onto a new monetary system, to the Bretton Woods Agreement, a gold-based system 80 years ago. So that's kind of the cycle. And of course, here we are 80 years later. I think anybody watching this knows we have massive amounts of debt around the world. These numbers are actually too low now. I need to update this slide. It's racking up so much debt. I can barely keep up with that.
Tell me about it. We had that trouble pinpointing the debt with IOUSA. We pegged it at 10 trillion in September of 2008, and within before Obama was brought into the office on Inauguration Day, it was already 11 trillion. So our movie was out of date within like 30 days.
Yeah, and now they've increased it by 20 trillion in the last 24 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous now.
And so when you're in this debt crisis, if you and I were playing a game, if we're out of moves, what do? You're out of moves, you have to reset the game. And if Fed has interest rates, which are at 0 or negative in most parts of the world, and we have so much debt, we can't print more. So they're basically out of moves. What do? Well, there's only 4 real ways out of a debt crisis. One is austerity. Nobody wants to do that. That means living on a budget. The next one is that we can default on the debt, but no nation can really do that, especially not the United States. We can do wealth transfers. which is taxes, but people can only get taxed so much before they go crazy. And so ultimately you end up with just number 4, devaluing or debasing the currency, printing as much of it as you can, which of course is the one they're always going to choose. And so this is
even the Romans clipped their coins, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an age-old problem, right? Humans always want something for nothing, and so we're always trying to figure that out. And this is a huge one for all the investors that are watching, because what a lot of people are always looking at is, what is my risk? Well, they should be. Not enough investors focus on the risk. Everyone's trying to make as much as they can. I know real investors focus on the downside. That's one of the things I got wrong in 2008. But everyone's thinking about their asset risk, but people also need to think about the currency risk that they're taking. So as I was saying with the dollar, the dollar could keep getting stronger against other currencies, but it could be losing value as well. And that's what happens when late stage governments start to print. Now we saw, remember, about every 80 years, the financial system is reset. As I said, 80 years ago was Bretton Woods was the Bretton Woods Agreement. And now we saw the IMF, Kristalina right here. She called for a Bretton Woods 2 moment. That's her words. So what does that mean? Well, Bretton Woods 1 was when the whole system was reset. She's calling for another reset of the entire system. So back to the question, what happens to the dollar? Will the dollar remain the king? Will China take over? Will we use IMF SDRs? Will we go back to gold, et cetera? And I think everybody's asking the wrong question. They're all looking for a centralized answer, an answer from on high. This is the new reserve currency of the world. But history tells us that we're rejecting centralization and moving to decentralization. So while everybody's looking for a centralized answer, the future is decentralized. So while they may want the dollar to be the reserve asset, my personal reserve asset is in Bitcoin. S&P 500 companies like MicroStrategy are using Bitcoin, and nations like El Salvador are using Bitcoin. So they can declare what they want, but that doesn't mean the people will use it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It's interesting because I wrote a lot about the transfer from the British pound to the US dollar as the reserve currency. And it took 2 world wars,
right,
to make that happen. So, I mean, that book doesn't bode well. And anytime I bring that up, I always feel like I'm predicting World War III, but that's not really my point, is that these transitions in centralization don't go lightly into that good night, right?
But maybe we are at war, Addison. So think about it, right? So to your point, wars typically come after the financial problems, not before.
Well, it comes with despair.
It comes with despair. And so wars are a way to, one, kind of create this nationalism, but it's also a way to kind of hide some of these financial problems. And aren't we at war? I saw a video yesterday of Klaus Schwab and said, we're at war against COVID. We're at war against the climate. And we need to be willing, the governments of the world, they met in Glasgow a month or 2 ago to talk about spending up to $176 trillion in the next 20 years to fight the climate war.
Yeah.
So maybe we are at war.
Yeah, we are at war, but at least the sort of theoretical idea of arguing with each other, those always fall apart, like détentes and alliances. And then that's when the hot wars start. And in history also, we see that the debtors always attack the debtees. Like the US owes whatever, I don't even know what the number is, $2 trillion to China. If we can't pay it off or inflate it away, there's historically the one recourse is to pick a fight over Taiwan or something.
What I would actually throw out there is that maybe we aren't worried about how much nations owe each other. And maybe the hierarchy of the world has been changed in a way where you have the banks, the BIS at the top.
Yeah.
And then you have the policymakers, the think tanks below, which is the WF, UN, et cetera. And the nation states actually sit down below that as the policy enforcers. And maybe it's actually the bankers at the top, the BIS, that have all the money and they just do accounting tricks budget by budget. And maybe we don't really need to go to war over that anymore.
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah. So in this context of three converging cycles, historical cycles, where should readers and investors go from here?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So there's a few things that I think we want to look at. So typically from a macro viewpoint, we're looking at what are the factors that will change. So typically a political thing or geopolitical thing that would cause money to funnel to a certain place. And then what are the bigger even factors that create these wealth transfers? And so a couple of things. So one, obviously, the decentralized revolution is the biggest technological revolution. Remember, they drive all financial cycles, markets. And so a big overarching play is obviously in the decentralized revolution, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, et cetera. That's the big trend. Smaller than that, what we also understand is as the nations continue centralization, they're going to continue to try to get more control. So they're going to do this through ESG narratives, right? And so ESG, they've been attacking energy for a long time. As I kind of mentioned earlier, Germany's been shutting down their nuclear plants, and now we have energy crises going on all throughout the world. So I think, focusing on things like that. So as they continue printing fake, unlimited amounts of counterfeit money, people want to buy real things that can't be inflated away. So we're seeing right now the markets are really starting to switch from growth into value, specifically in commodities, and even more specifically into energy. And so that's kind of like this macro framework. We understand that they're going to continue squeezing, and they're going to try to get more control, and then it's going to start to cause these distortions. So that's one. We also understand that through this decentralization, people are going to start spreading out around the world. And so there's going to be this great migration. So that opens up plays for cash flow and real estate investing, things like that, as well as technologies that cater to that, I think, as well. And so we're really looking at this lens, a zoomed out lens with perspective, to understand where will the money flow because of that. And so that's a couple of big buckets that I think about and how that affect. I mean, the governments are going to have to continue printing more money. From the Austrian viewpoint, more money means more inflation. And so how do we protect ourselves from that? So that's kind of the framework that I go through, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the offer. You put all this together in a bundle that people can actually take advantage of. So this is kind of an overview of everything that you've been thinking, and you've flushed it out in a nice package that people can dig deeper if they want.
Yep. So unfortunately, it's times of turmoil that cause volatility is when the best opportunity is there. If there was no volatility and everything stayed flat, there's no chance to make money. And so we want volatility. And I look at it like I'm a surfer. I'm from Southern California. I travel the world to go surf big waves. Now, I'll find out there's a storm happening in the South Pacific, and some people may be leaving the island because it's going to be this big storm. I might be going there because I want to go ride the waves. And that's because I'm trained for this. And so if you're prepared, this volatility becomes an opportunity, not disaster. And so the question is, what if you could make more money when there's chaos and confusion in the market, which of course there is chaos and confusion. And yes, of course, we can make more money doing that. And I would say now is definitely not the time to cash out and go run for safety. Now is the time just to move your investments and to continue to ride that wave like I would as a surfer. So let me show you kind of how I'm doing this. All right, so now that you understand the macro framework and you understand that it is through volatility that we training, proper education, and things like that. Now, I told you my own story through 2008 financial crash. It was massively volatile, and I lost all my money, all my assets. That wasn't good, and it's because I didn't have the right educational foundation. Now, it was a huge opportunity for other people. It just wasn't for me. And so I wrote a cryptocurrency research newsletter for about 4 years. And during that time, I put up over 20 calls that went up over 1,000%. One of my calls went up over 100,000%. It was amazing. But after doing that kind of track record, people that were reading my newsletter were still losing money. And I'm like, how can you lose money? I've never seen performance like this in my life. And it's because they didn't have just the basic foundations of how to invest, how much to allocate, how to take profits, where do I put those profits, and things like that. And so the first thing I did is it made me very sad. It made me actually mad because they were making the same mistakes that I had made. And I didn't want to do that. And like, how could you lose money after making that much money? Kind of like an athlete or a rapper who goes broke after making that much money. And so really it starts with the education. And so I put together what I call the 4 pillars masterclass. You started out by saying very nicely of me, saying I take these complex subjects and make them easy to understand. And so I've boiled this down into just 4 pillars that you should think about investing through: investing for growth, investing for cash flow, holding cash as a pillar, and then chaos hedge insurance. And so in this masterclass, it's videos, it's modules, it's worksheets that you can fill out that give you answers and track things. This gives you the educational foundation. This will turn you into a big wave surfer. So you can go with me and surf the big waves and have a lot of fun while most people are having danger. And so like I said, through quizzes, it tells you where you're at. You know, if you've ever asked the question, like if I were to say, hey, buy this cryptocurrency, it's hot, you might say, well, how much should I put in? And if you have that question, that means you need to take this 4 pillars masterclass that I've put together. It's full of videos just like this, interactive, etc. And then once you have that foundation, now you know, okay, here's how much I put into this asset, and I understand all this about myself. I have this education. Then what assets do you buy? So the world's changing, as I said, right? So like energy is a really good play right now, for example, or cash flow in certain areas of the country where people are migrating to is a good play. So now that I have the foundation, what do I buy? Mark, what's the hot cryptocurrency to buy? What's the best cash flow that I can buy right now? What about gold? What about gold miners, things like that? And so the Tactical Asset Report is my newsletter that I write on a monthly basis that gives you my macro thesis for the month. Here's what's happening in the world today, and this is where the money is flowing, and this is the one asset that we should be buying for this month based off this long lens that I have. So you get the monthly report every single month that gives you the macro lens. We also have these what I call quick hit trade alerts. So sometimes the market's moving really quick. We can get in, get out, pull some cash out. So you get all my quick hit trade alerts. And then every single week, we're doing a market update just to say, here's the macro views of the week. And what are we thinking about the market? Are we still bullish? Are we in the middle? Are we bearish? And how do we want to think about moving our portfolio? So you get 52 weeks of updates from me, a monthly market report. You get a live portfolio tracker so you can see every single position we're in, if it's a buy, it's a sell, as well as the full transparency of every position we've ever had open, all in there. And we have our own private members area where everybody can talk and share ideas, ask me, the other analysts, questions about their portfolios. That's all included in the Tactical Asset Report. And then I created something I call the High Performance Investor. And so the High Performance Investor is more modules of videos where I go through the mindset. So as humans, we're horrible investors. We rush towards pleasure, so we buy the tops of markets. We run from pain, so we sell the bottom of the market. And so we go through the mindset, we go through the actions, we go into actual investing strategies, and then I give you 2 of my highest level investing strategies that I've paid tens of thousands of dollars to learn, and I teach them all to you inside the video course in the High Performance Investor. And then I didn't tell you about this, Addison, but I decided I might throw this in as well. I had a live conference a few months ago, and I brought in 15 experts in each different area, and I brought them all together. We had a live conference in Miami, and it was 15 of the top experts from bonds to currencies, to stocks, to Bitcoin, to every aspect, even health. And we said, what do you think is going to happen over the next couple of years? And more importantly, what are you going to do about it to protect yourself? It was an amazing conference. Everyone said it was the best thing they've ever been to. I have all the recordings, and I thought, you know what? Let me just give these to your audience as well. This is the most up-to-date information from the broadest audience base that we have. And I think we can throw that in as well. And so basically you have the complete Market Disruptors Toolkit, the education, how to split up your assets, how to think about it as this thesis unfolds, what exact assets I'm buying that fit within that framework, and the high performance habits and training that you need to really take advantage of all that.
Yeah, this was really great. And Judd, who we both know, he's a producer of Wiggin Sessions. He was at the event and he was raving. He came back with Bitcoin positions he wanted to get into, and he met a lot of interesting people too. So the recordings themselves are worth probably the entire package, just because you brought in a lot of interesting people that agree in general, but they bring in their own perspectives as well.
Yeah, I mean, the tickets to the event to have access where it was $2,500 alone just for the ticket to the event. And so basically you're going to get the behind the scenes kind of view in every single one. So it's worth more than this entire package.
Yeah, you know, Mark, I really appreciate that you went through all of this with me, because you know, we've been talking, and I really appreciate how you do condense down the ideas into a simple and easy to understand. But the real payoff is being able to put those ideas into action and actually getting your trades or the ideas that you have for trading in the market on an ongoing basis. So I just want to say to everyone who's paying attention, if you're interested in furthering a relationship with Mark, all you have to do is click on the link below. You'll see, yep, look, you'll see the package, and then we'll explain how all the pieces fit together, and you can just go from there. Mark, I really want to thank you for joining me today. This has been fun.
Yeah, thanks so much, Addison. I appreciate you having me. Hopefully it was helpful. Everyone just zoom out. Everything gets a lot more clear. Your decisions get more clear. And while things look scary, I promise you the future is going to be better as long as we navigate this correctly.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, man. Thanks.
Thank you.